Promise of Blood. Book 1 in the Powder Mage trilogy, written by Brian McClellan and read by Christian Rodska. Chapter 1. Adamat wore his coat tight, top buttons fastened against a wet night air that seemed to want to drown him. He tugged at his sleeves, trying to coax more length, and picked at the front of the jacket, where it was too close by far around the waist. It had been half a decade since he'd even seen this jacket, but when summons came from the king at this hour, there was no time to get his good one from the tailor. Yet this summer coat provided no defence against the chill snaking through the carriage window. The morning was not far off, but dawn would have a hard time scattering the fog. Adamat could feel it. It was humid even for early spring in Adopest, and chillier than Novi's frozen toes. The soothsayers in No Man's Alley said it was a bad omen, yet who listened to soothsayers these days? Adamat reasoned it would give him a cold, and wondered why he had been summoned out on a pit-made night like this. The carriage approached the front gate of Skyline and moved on without a stop. Adamat clutched at his pant legs and peered out the window. The guards were not at their posts. Odder still, as they continued along the wide path amid the fountains, there were no lights. Skyline had so many lanterns it could be seen all the way from the city, even on the cloudiest night. Tonight, the gardens were dark. Adamat was fine with this. Manhooch used enough of their taxes for his personal amusement. Adamat stared out into the gardens at the black moors where the hedge mazes began, and imagined shapes flitting back and forth in the lawn. What was... Oh, just a sculpture. Adamat sat back, took a deep breath. He could hear his heart beating, thumping, frightened, his stomach tightening. Perhaps they should light the garden lanterns. A little part of him, the part that had once been a police inspector, prowling nights such as these for the thieves and pickpockets in dark alleys, laughed out from inside. "Still your heart, old man," he said to himself. "You were once the eyes staring back from the darkness." The carriage jerked to a stop. Adamat waited for the coachman to open the door. He might have waited all night. The driver rapped on the roof. "You're here," a gruff voice said. Rude. Adamat stepped from the coach, just having time to snatch his hat and cane before the driver flicked the reins and was off, clattering into the night. Adamat uttered a quiet curse after the man and turned around, looking up at Skyline. The nobility called Skyline Palace the Jewel of the Adro. It rested on a high hill east of Adopest, so that the sun rose above it every morning. One particularly bold newspaper had compared it to a starving pauper wearing a diamond ring. It was an apt comparison in these lean times. A king's pride doesn't fill the people's bellies. He was at the main entrance. By day it was a grand avenue of marbled walks and fountains, all leading to a pair of giant silver-plated doors, themselves dwarfed by the sheer facade of the biggest single building in Adro. Adamat listened for the soft footfalls of patrolling heelmen. It was said the king's personal guard were everywhere in these gardens, watching every secluded corner, muskets always loaded, bayonets fixed, their grey and white sashes sombre among the green and gold splendour. But there were no footfalls, nor were the fountains running. He'd heard once that the fountains only stopped for the death of the king. Surely he'd not have been summoned here if Manhooch were dead. He smoothed the front of his jacket. Here, next to the building, a few of the lanterns were lit. A figure emerged from the darkness. Adamat tightened his grip on his cane, ready to draw the hidden sword inside at a moment's notice. It was a man in uniform, but little could be discerned in such ill light. He held a rifle or a musket, trained loosely on Adamat, and wore a flat-topped forage cap with a stiff visor. Only one thing could be certain. He was not a heelman. Their tall, plumed hats were easy to recognize, and they never went without them. "You're alone?" a voice asked. "Yes," Adamat said. He held up both hands and turned around. "All right, come on." The soldier edged forward and yanked on one of the mighty silver doors. It rolled outward slowly, ponderously, despite the man putting his weight into it. Adamat moved closer and examined the soldier's jacket. It was dark blue with silver braiding. Adran military. In theory, the military reported to the king. In practice, one man held their leash, Field Marshal Tamas. "Step back, friend," the soldier said. There was a note of impatience in his voice, some unseen stress, but that could have been the weight of the door. Adamat did as he was told, only coming forward again to slip through the entrance when the soldier gestured. "Go ahead," the soldier directed. "Take a right at the diadem and head through the diamond hall. Keep walking until you find yourself in the answering room." The door inched shut behind him and closed with a muffled thump. Adamat was alone in the palace vestibule. Adran military, he mused. Why would a soldier be here on the grounds without any sign of the Heelmen? The most frightening answer sprang to mind first: a power struggle. Had the military been called in to deal with a rebellion? There were a number of powerful factions within Adro: the Wings of Adam mercenaries, the Royal Cabal, the Mountain Watch, and the great noble families. Any one of them could have been giving Manhooch trouble. None of it made sense, though. If there had been a power struggle, the palace grounds would be a battlefield, or destroyed outright by the Royal Cabal. Adamat passed the diadem, a giant facsimile of the Adran crown, and noted it was in as bad taste as rumour had it. He entered the diamond hall, where the walls and floor were of scarlet, accented in gold leaf, and thousands of tiny gems, which gave the room its name, glittered from the ceiling in the light of a single-lit candelabra. The tiny flames of the candelabra flickered as if in the wind, and the room was cold. Adamat's sense of unease deepened as he neared the far end of the gallery. Not a sign of life, and the only sound came from his own echoing footfalls on the marble floor. A window had been shattered, explaining the chill. The result of one of the king's famous temper tantrums? Or something else? He could hear his heart beating in his ears. There, behind a curtain, a pair of boots? Adamat passed a hand before his eyes. A trick of the light. He stepped over to reassure himself and pulled back the curtain. A body lay in the shadows. Adamat bent over it, touched the skin. It was warm, but the man was most certainly dead. He wore grey pants with a white stripe down the side and a matching jacket. A tall hat with a white plume lay on the floor some ways away. A Heelman. The shadows played on a young, clean-shaven face, peaceful, except for a single hole in the side of his skull and the dark, wet stain on the floor. He'd been right. A struggle of some kind. Had the Heelmen rebelled, and the military been brought in to deal with them? Again, it didn't make any sense. The Heelmen were fanatically loyal to the king, and any matters within Skyline Palace would have been dealt with by the Royal Cabal. Adamat cursed silently. Every question compounded itself. He suspected he'd find some answers soon enough. Adamat left the body behind the curtain. He lifted his cane and twisted, bared a few inches of steel, and approached a tall doorway flanked by two hooded, sceptre-wielding sculptures. He paused between the ancient statues and took a deep breath, letting his eyes wander over a set of arcane script scrawled into the portal. He entered. The answering room made the Hall of Diamonds look small,